Welcome back to Burnout Break Room, the podcast that's like a break room, but helpful, where we look at burnout through a realistic lens, talk about ways to take a break from the grind, and spill the tea.
I'm Caitlin Truhella, creativity coach and speaker.
I'm Lyndie Larimore, licensed therapist and certified career coach. We are your hosts. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Burnout Break Room. Hi, Caitlin.
Hey, Lyndie, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. I went on my first choir tour since 2004. You're like, that wasn't that long ago. 20 years ago. And ironically, I will say, a little kismet moment. I kind of accidentally stayed in the same hotel that I stayed in the first time I was on choir tour in New York. So
Oh,
that was kind of a
wow.
cool, like full circle 20 years later moment. But
hmm
how about you? How are you doing?
That is fabulous. And I am very grateful to have gotten to spend some more time in art this weekend as well. And it's so funny to your point too about, how time flies when, we get absorbed into different things. I haven't sat down and actually sketched in a really long time. I mean, how simple, it can be. And I know like this as a solitary practice, it's, a little bit easier to achieve than productions and things like that. But even just, sitting down with some pencil paper and I just put on some music and like it was so much easier than traditional meditating for me. It was just so rejuvenating. And as we've talked about before, I asked myself the same question afterwards, like, why don't I do this more often?
Right? Yeah. There's something about that with any form of meditation or whatever makes you feel like, get into that state of flow. It's always
Mm,
like, oh yeah, I should do this more. But then there's something cool about taking a break from something and then coming back to it however many years later and being like, oh, I've still got this, or this still brings me joy.
right, exactly. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with either taking a break or trying different things because things do still happen within that hiatus or the different time period. I remember when I was 13, I wanted to learn how to play the guitar and fully expecting to, stumble through learning an instrument for the first time and it was really difficult and through traditional lessons and practicing, it didn't click. And 5 years later, I picked it up. It was gathering dust, and for some reason, it just made sense. And of course, it wasn't like, I just picked it up and was able to play entire songs or anything, but the practice came so much easier and, the technical parts made so much more sense. It was a good break. Clearly, stuff
Hmm.
was still going on and solidifying in that time.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And that's, you know what? That's so encouraging because I think, especially nowadays, we have this like instant gratification thing, or not even instant gratification, but instant mastery expectation. Uh,
Mm,
and I used to have that as a kid too. Like, no one ever sat me down and said, the first time you try something, you will be terrible at it, and that's okay, but you won't be
hmm
terrible at it forever. But to your point, Caitlin, like, I think sometimes we're just not ready for things for whatever reason.
hmm
It could be,
hmm
the size of your fingers to just where you're at in life and where your brain development is or whatever, stress levels, confidence levels. So like it's okay to like say, yeah, this isn't for me right now, but like also it's okay to come back to it.
Right. And the mental state that you approach, these activities is such a big influence in that as well. And I love that you bring that up. And as we had mentioned previously in for the journal prompt talking about masking, I
Mm.
think about the mentality that I was in when I first picked up an instrument. The first instrument I ever picked up was not a guitar, but it was a violin. And I
Mm.
had this idea as a kid that in order to be a violinist,
Mm.
you had to be concert level ready. And of course, the first time you pick one up, or the first violin that you pick up, maybe it's like a $60 violin. No matter how good you are, that particular violin is not going to sound the same as the ones you hear in concert.
Sure, the Stradivarius. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
They're a little different, a little different.
Hmm.
That was also my first instrument. And by first instrument, I mean my parents bought it for me. We couldn't find a teacher, and that was the end of that.
Oh.
But I also, but then when my first degree was in vocal performance and I had to have a minor. And so I just chose piano. And let me tell you, again, I wish somebody had sat me down and said, sit in the being terrible for a little while. It's okay.
Mm.
It was
Hmm.
intimidating to be sitting in practice rooms surrounded by really amazing pianists. And I really might not have been wrong in thinking that like everyone there was better than me, but that was pretty bad. But like I couldn't sit with the discomfort of being so bad. So I just never
Mm.
practiced. I just never did it. To this day, regret like the opportunity I had with access to like good teachers and everything. And I wish I'd known just about incremental development and like, yeah, stick with it for a little while. It'll feel a little less like torture, and you might actually like the sound that you create.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more with you, Lindy. Sitting in the discomfort of being terrible at something is it takes a lot of energy and faith in yourself too, that this state of being terrible is only temporary. And I think a really important exercise too in being curious, because
Mm,
when we
mm,
utilize our curiosity to explore different aspects of said thing, whatever skill we're looking to cultivate or to nurture, the curiosity helps, I think, build a significant bridge between taking the focus away from recognizing that we are terrible, like just like in the writing process. My favorite part about Anne Lamott's writing, she talks about shitty first drafts. Is like, your
mm,
first draft will
mm.
always be shitty, and
Yeah.
that's okay. That's
Mhm,
what it's meant to do. You can go
mhm,
back and take the nuggets out, but still, relating it to on the music theme, I remember my grandmother had this organ piano
mhm.
in the front her front sitting room,
Yeah.
and when I was little, she would let me go in there and just play on the organ, and play in the very literal sense, not
Yeah.
not in the not in the musical sense.
Yeah.
And I think back to the 20 minutes probably at a time I would sit there and just make noise.
Mhm.
I I strive to have that level of patience that she had to just listen to absolute nonsense.
Mm.
But I hold those memories so closely because those were some of the most cherished times at her house. And they're cherished because of our time together, not because I was making great music or it sounded great. It's very fondly remembered.
Mm. The wonderful experience of being, because I used to do the same thing with a piano that's now in my living room that I grew up with. I have a picture of me when I was probably 3, just like pounding away at the piano. And I always look at that and be like, man, you'd think I'd be better by now. But just that unbridled, like, I'm making the best thing ever. And like, there's no, it's like, yeah, this is so cool. And I wish I'd like could capture that moment anytime I sit in front of some kind of music and just come at it with that unbridled, like fully in the moment. I don't care what anyone thinks. This is amazing kind of approach, right? That
Mm,
you come at a piano when you're 3 years old. I wrote I When I talked about masking in the journal prompt, I'm actually going to change it up in the moment in vivo. We're going to change it up because what I talked about was kind of that feeling of like, I think the mask that I always put on unconsciously is like, yeah, I'm chill, like whatever, it's all good. But
Mm-hmm.
inside, it's like I've got that, that Julia Roberts meme with like all the numbers going, I'm always like,
Mm,
planning ahead, like, okay, what's next? And like, what do I got to do? What's my list? What I have not done on my list? Like, what do I got to, what's 10 steps ahead from now? And,
mm,
not just in my schedule, but like in this conversation. And, what are you thinking about my outfit? And like, what am I going to wear tomorrow? And how am I going to look really cool? But also, like, I didn't think about it at all. Like, this is the constant chatter that's going on. I'm going to drop that because you made me realize another mask that I have, since we're in the world of art. And for me, I'm thinking of music. The experiences that I've had as a classical singer, most recently I had a performance where I was singing in a what they called a cantatathon, where we did 5 Bach cantatas in a row at one time in one sitting,
whoa. Okay.
um, with 5 different conductors and 5 different choruses, but the soloists were the same throughout, and I was the soprano soloist. And this was kind of my return from not fully intentional hiatus from solo work since the pandemic. And so it was intimidating. And there is something that happens, I think, especially with certain forms of music, certain composers, where the first several days to weeks of preparing this music, you feel like you've never sung a note before. It just feels so weird and so foreign, and like you completely forget how to sing, for me. Um, and so I went into this rehearsal process, and for weeks I was like, I don't, not only do I not think that I can do this, but I don't know that I'll ever be able to sing again. And I've been singing for, a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've studied it, officially. Um, and it was this really scary feeling. But then, walking into a rehearsal for something else, or walking into the church gig or something and being like, I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. I've got this under control. Nothing is wrong here. So that kind of competence mask that I put on, even when I feel about as incompetent as I possibly can feel.
Absolutely. And I totally relate. I own the same mask, and it oscillates between that experience and imposter syndrome.
Oh,
So it's like the going back and forth between I'm competent, I know what I'm doing, and you logically go through the steps to recognize all the preparation you've put in to, up to this point, and your ability to demonstrate, said skills, and then questioning everything.
mhm,
And so it's an interesting experience when you also mask for yourself, not
mhm,
just what you want to be perceived as. And that kind of, as you're describing also that experience of not only wanting to like be a, competent and, skilled person at that particular ability, and especially when it comes to performances, but recognizing it in yourself, because it
mhm,
kind of reminds me of the conversation that I have with authors, especially new authors, when they're talking about within the context of, well, once I get published, then I can call myself an author. And that idea of prescribing a title or a belief, like a fundamental belief to yourself. Once I achieve this thing, once I accomplish this, once I perfect this skill, I'm going through the Perfectionist Guide to Letting Go book right
ooh,
now.
ooh, ouch. That
Yeah.
title hurts me. I feel seen, too seen. Anyway,
Believe
sorry.
me. And to that point, like I'm going through this slowly because I read 2 pages and it's like I need to sit down. It's really interesting looking at the different types of perfectionism and the resulting masks that we wear to to determine like what we want to telegraph to the rest of the world about the things we value. And one of them was talking about the Parisian perfectionism and that mindset that, you know, we want to be seen as not only skilled at this thing, but that it's like so effortless
Yeah.
because this is, you know, a deep part of me. And that, of course, can be really difficult to experience because, you know, as I was talking about before, oscillating between believing in ourselves and then questioning ourselves.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I mean, what that means is that you truly value not only this skill, but your like involvement in it.
Mhm.
And I had I had a very similar experience in the first ever art class I ever took. I had
Mm.
no intention of doing anything with like painting or sketching or anything like that, but I had when I was in community college getting my AA, I had an extra elective. So I was like, oh, I'm going to take art and enjoy this experience. And of course, it was also an appreciative nod to my grandmother as well. She was absolutely loved painting. And I go into this experience and, you know, choosing this class with full knowledge that I was nervous about having anyone look at any of my sketches or art or anything that I was doing with that,
Mm.
let alone evaluating it.
Mm.
And I fully expected to come into class on the first day and, you know, have a conversation about like, okay, we're going to draw spheres and maybe some cubes and maybe triangles. And we'll talk about, you know, the basics of how you look at a physical object and attempt to capture that on a page through, you know, different artistic mediums.
Mm.
No, we come in the first day, sit down, and my instructor says, today we're going to draw hands.
No.
You're going to draw your own hand.
Nope.
And I will tell you, in that moment, I wished the earth would just open up and swallow me whole. But so much credit to this particular instructor because even with as much fear and maybe we can call it pre-shame
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. I like it.
that that I was feeling even before, you know, attempting this assignment live in front of 20 so other people, it actually went really well. And being coached through the this exercise and just taking it very slow and noticing so many different things about my own hand that I had never seen before. It was like, you know, looking at it for the first time through the eyes of an artist. And not only was I actually really proud of the final product that came out of that sketch that day, but I still have it as a constant reminder that those shitty first drafts and
Mhm.
that first attempt is incredibly valuable just because it may not look like what you want it to as a final product. It's still part of the process.
Beautifully said, Caitlin. And I'm thinking of the arts and burnout
Mm-hmm.
and how those things I think so often, you know, even when I'm talking with clients about burnout, I'm often talking about like how can you access the creative and you know what can you do that's artistic and because accessing creativity helps in healing and treating burnout and it can also lead directly to burnout and I think we're kind of touching on the edges of where that happens not only sometimes I know a lot of freelance musicians a lot of them are friends of mine and we talk a lot about how it feels so wrong to say no when a gig is offered and that
Mm.
fear of like it used to be called I used to have a friend who would be like oh yeah you know like January is wasn't snowstorm it was something oh it's my calendar's white it's all white there's no gigs on it so it's like
Mm. Mm-hmm.
like a snowstorm but they called it something different. Yeah. And so that fear of like, if I say no to this, I'll never get another offer again. And so saying yes to everything, taking everything. And yes, that can lead to burnout just like anything else, even though it's yes, it's accessing the creative and doing things that for other people can feel very relaxing and healing. But also the mindset when we go into things, I'm thinking about all of the different seasons that I've been through as a singer,
Mm,
which feel very different than my seasons as a therapist. They're similar but very different. As a therapist, I feel pretty competent. I feel like I know what I'm doing. I've experienced a few different kinds of being a therapist and I feel pretty confident. As a singer, I still don't know if I feel confident as a singer. Like if I do, it started like 2 weeks ago. It's a much more vulnerable, much more kind of exposed kind of thing for me. And
mm,
there was a time at the beginning where I was very much in that hustle mentality, like I'll take whatever I can get, I'll take whatever comes my way. Didn't really know what I was doing. And then I kind of immediately gave up and said, nope, like I got my first really awful rejection and was like, this is too much. I can't do this. And I just kind of gave up. I didn't even get to burnout with that one. And then I kind of came back to it years later. And that time I knew a little bit more about what I was doing. I met some people that were pretty helpful and gave me good advice. And I was able to start to get some traction and start to get some gigs. And that was when I was in that place of like full hustle. Every gig was something that would get me the next gig.
mm,
And every gig was about, okay, like who can I talk to here? Who's going to help me out here? How can I look good enough here so that I can have 3 more gigs from this experience kind of thing. And that's an okay way to think, right? It's entrepreneurial, right? It's how we have to think if we're running our own business.
mhm,
And I believe that mentality led to burnout for me because when I was looking at those experiences as a means to an end and an end that never had a defined arrival,
mhm,
it meant that nothing was ever good enough. And I never stopped to enjoy the process.
mhm,
And so it was always like, okay, what's next? What can I get that's bigger and better? And I don't know that I sometimes, but I think a few times I kind of missed how wonderful these opportunities were and forgot to kind of let it be a reveling in the joy of making music with really skilled musicians.
mm. Absolutely. And I think that experience is a big part of going back to the mask that you were talking about earlier. It's so easy to get wrapped up in the mentality of what does my performance, what does my role in this art mean for the production or
Mhm.
for the world? And it's a perfectly valid question, but when left unchecked, it can definitely make us feel like we're under a microscope instead
Mhm.
of, as you said, appreciating the art for what it is.
Mhm. And I think I was even looking at these gigs almost as how does it serve me instead of how do I serve it?
Mm,
Like to your point, I think there's such a thing as like feeling too much in service of it and not thinking about how it can be reciprocal, but also I think there's a an element of what can I get from this that serves me instead of like how can I be a part of a collaboration that creates this beautiful thing that's bigger than all of us.
right, right. And I definitely have experienced that in my experience in the film world, and
Mhm.
at least in my experience with that particular industry and form of art, there's a definitive predatory undertone. And when I say
Mm.
predatory, I mean the message that is constantly sent to especially new creatives in that world is there are so many people in this field and so many people more qualified and ready than you are that you are more than replaceable. And I know that this experience, especially when it comes to auditions, it isn't exclusive to film. There's all different types of auditions. I mean, even interviewing for, a traditional job is another form of an audition,
Mhm.
but experiencing that kind of dehumanization in that process and to use the literal theater application of masking
Mhm.
to do an audition for a character, it is still incredibly vulnerable to put yourself out there in that space in a room full of people that you've never met, and you're not getting any eye contact from anyone, receiving little to no direction. And as an artist operating in somewhat of a vacuum from just a handful of details that you might know about a character, and having somebody point at you and say, go.
Mm.
And it, again, at least in my experience, that really reinforces that internal mentality that you were talking about. If I say no to any work, then that's it. That
Mhm.
may as well be an end to my career or my involvement in this type of work, because there are tons of other people that are ready to fill the spot.
Mhm. Mhm. I almost teared up remembering those feelings of like, the auditions, and almost like it was self-protective for me to think, Lindy, you're a soprano, you can throw a rock and hit 20 of them, the second you walk outside of this building. And most of them, I'm in a town where they turn out beautiful 20-year-old sopranos every December and May because we have a bunch of conservatories, and you know what I mean. So like I
Mm,
as a way of protecting myself, I would walk into every audition with this "you're expendable and you don't matter" kind of approach, and then just to trick myself into like feeling less nervous, I guess.
mm,
But over time, I just started to believe it, and really started to buy into, yeah, they don't need me, and I think it did a number on me. Um, and really, I lost my own value and worth and contribution to whatever I was touching.
mm,
And I think, I'm also thinking, just to kind of bring it back to like that corporate life or even with coaching or entrepreneurial work, I think this all relates in the bigger picture. I think, burnout comes when I think there's something about losing a part of ourselves and losing sight of our own contribution and value,
mm,
to either because we're not seeing it or no one around us is seeing it or at least acknowledging it. And then we start to say yes to whatever it is, right? Like the project or the deadline or whatever it might be that feels a little too much, or a little ridiculous or dehumanizing, because, well, I'm one of many. They can hire anyone at any time to do this work, so I might as well just say yes, not question. Or as a coach or an entrepreneur, to take whatever comes my way, even if it feels a little not okay.
mm. Yeah, it really does apply to so many different areas. And I think so much about my burnout experience in my corporate job, and definitely falling into that mentality of wanting to contribute more, and especially the opportunity to use the skills that you are most proud of or that you find the most joy in doing. I think a big part of my burnout experience was it started very much as that, consistently saying yes
Mhm.
to more work as you described, or the, tighter deadlines and things like that, but also not realizing when your skills are not being valued
Mm,
and you're not being offered a seat at the table where you would have the opportunity to shine. And of course, when I say shine, it's not just about the recognition, but it's the contribution.
mhm.
It's a different type of exhaustion, more so than just mental and emotional, physical. It's
Well, what about shame-based exhaustion?
mm, mm-hmm,
I mean, for sure, existential, because you're recognizing that, I'm no longer speaking from my experience. I try to anticipate what they wanted, not what I could give.
mm,
So I started silencing every gut response, every impulse, because I'd seen enough times where what I had to give was not welcome and not okay. And so I was living on shame. I was living on, like, that was the fuel for me at one point when I was at my most burnt out. Was, shame became the mask that helped me survive the experience. And it absolutely did result in an existential crisis, because I then, yeah, we talked about this before. I didn't like who I was. I didn't recognize who I was, and I couldn't even like access myself in that moment, because I was so just trying to avoid, being in trouble or saying the thing that would get me in trouble, or get the little side conversation from somebody, Lyndie, when you said this, you really felt like whatever, the insert conversation here kind of thing. And there were times when definitely I probably said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and trying to own that. But I'm just sheer ratios. It probably wasn't every time, right? There were probably some
mm.
times when it was the right thing, right? And so I when I think about my biggest experience with burnout, I really think about how much shame contributed to that experience.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that makes burnout such a difficult thing to tackle too, because it's so multifaceted. It can come from so many different places and sources.
Mhm.
And maybe more recently, it's become more okay to talk about and
Mm,
becoming less stigmatized. But
yeah.
that by all means doesn't mean that, people in different experiences would necessarily feel comfortable just coming out and saying I'm completely burnt out, in X, Y, or Z fashion.
Mhm.
And of course, shame already being very sticky and, a difficult thing to tackle in an individual sense. But then when you talk about it in any kind of group dynamic, it becomes even more difficult. But yeah, I think there's tremendous power in being either like the first person to share, like, I'm ashamed that I'm feeling burnt out about this because I know that I'm capable of doing said thing, but it doesn't matter how you get to a state of burnout, whether it's, over a long period of time or whether somebody runs there full
Mhm.
steam. It's still something that we all deserve to take time to recover from and recognize that it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
That's powerful. And how have you recovered from like shame-based burnout?
The biggest part of I would say one of the biggest masks that I wear is similar to what you were describing before in terms of not only competency but ability. I'm very proud that I have a lot of skills that span a lot of different areas, and it's kind of become a form of collecting. Like, some people collect stamps. I like to collect skills.
Mm,
So
mm.
of course, then, you would think that the what lies underneath that mask might be being ashamed of not being able to do something. And going back to my experience in the art class is manifested in some ways in art. If I'm not immediately good at some form of art, it's like so incredibly frustrating. I should just be able to understand this. I should just be able to, replicate it. And so I realized that a big piece of my burnout experience was focusing completely, 110% on the results. And so because of that, I wasn't spending time in any of my art. Everything that I was doing, from work, from my business to, my academic experience, all of it was for the external. I was, creating for somebody else's result. So I realized that I needed to spend time not only in my own art and projects that I cared about, but especially to be able to refocus on just the process and not the product. Because as an artist, you can be an artist to, the world, and especially, with social media, but it doesn't mean you need to share absolutely everything. So the not that this needs to be said, but as I said before, spending time sketching this weekend, I have zero intention of sharing that anywhere. And it's not because I don't want anybody to see it, but because we have to allow some things to be just for us. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the more people that I talk to about this, the more it resonates with recognizing the very, very rebellious act of taking away the need for any external validation, or even a kind of secondary message of the expectation that if you're an artist, then you need to share everything. Everybody needs to see what you're doing. Of course, this extends beyond just the arts as well. If you're an entrepreneur, or, in your career, like a traditional career, you need to put every project that you're working on, everything you're involved with, it needs to be right front and center on your LinkedIn, super sparkly. And this practice of doing some of these things just for me has been incredibly rewarding, and also has really played a huge part in helping to refocus exactly what I believe my purpose is on this planet, and in this lifetime, and all of the big things, but also remembering all of the things that truly bring me joy. And I know it probably sounds very, very trite to talk about play theory and spending time doing things that might not go anywhere, or, as I said, aren't results oriented, but it is a necessary part of being human. And I think to myself all the time, back in the days of cavemen and early hominids, I don't think they had any goal to be sitting in a windowless box for 8 hours a day doing spreadsheets or what have you. We weren't made for that.
You mean they didn't have their own form of Excel? Caitlin, I don't understand. How did they function without
Right?
spreadsheets?
The pivot tables in the dirt.
How did they get anything done?
Right. Right. Somebody's gotta keep the wheels on the train moving.
Well said. Well said. So what I'm hearing is that the cure to burnout is to try to hang out in the joy and less in the productivity, less about the end result, more about the joy of the process, even though it doesn't always bring joy, but kind of what we were talking about before, like the sitting with the discomfort of the process, but also finding the joy in the smaller moments that aren't Instagram ready.
Right. Because when we remove the expectation from ourselves to make or be a part of something, to your point, that is Instagram worthy, then we're only thinking about the focus is on the result. And within the context of the social media application, the engagement, what's the public response going to be? And
Mhm,
so when we can refocus to just paying attention to the process
mhm.
and finding our joy in that, it is tremendously healing. And of course that's not to say that every process is joyful,
No, yeah.
but
Mhm,
but going back through those experiences help to orient us to see what we find joy in. Because
mhm,
and I experienced this with some of my clients as well. I we start to talk about what creative practices do you have? It's like, oh well, I don't have any. Okay, well tell me a little bit about what you do enjoy doing. Like if you don't have any hobbies right now, what hobbies did you have in the past? And some people talk about the shame around, I feel like I really don't have any. So therefore, I don't know where to start. And the honestly, that's in some cases, that's the best place to start because
mhm,
you have every option in the world.
mhm,
And yeah, it might be uncomfortable to go through the process of trying a lot of different things, but again, it's all there's no way to do those things incorrectly. If you want to try, roller skating for the first time, that's great. If you don't like it, you don't ever have to do it again if you don't want to. If you want to try, making origami fidget spinners or like fidget toys, that kind of thing, you totally can. And it's all about, sitting in that process to truly be honest with yourself. Do I enjoy this? It's not about the end process. Did I make a good thing? Did I make a artist worthy thing? Is
mhm,
are you enjoying the process?
mhm. And this is making me think of something that a friend said to me when I was fully in hustle mode back in the day, when we had just finished an opera together. And I think we were working on a recital series. Shout out to Teddy Mushler, founder of Mixtape Recital Series. She was someone who really put a lot of thought into the process and the entrepreneurship of being a freelance musician. And she said something about just how damaging it can be, and I'm misquoting her, but how damaging it can be to only see the end result on social media and never see the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, first of all, that brings the shame in pretty early on, right? Because if what the only thing we see from our colleagues and peers and celebrities is the thing that happens when you've been working on something for weeks to months, you've had coachings, you've had lessons, you've had time to work through all the bugs, you've gotten your hair and makeup done, you have the nice dress on, the lights are on, and that's when the picture is taken. Then we start to think, even those of us who've developed great practice habits and have a pretty good process in place, it's still easy to think that if it's not that, it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost never that. It's that, like, just a few times a year. It's almost always the if you ever have the opportunity to listen to a musician in their warm-ups or their practice process, first of all, so many swear words, so many swear words. Like, you'll hear this beautiful line and then you'll hear like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and a lot of weird sounds, a lot of messy sounds. In fact, you have to be messy in
Mm,
order to be polished. You have to let yourself be messy, which is something I'm still working on. How do I let it just be really messy and gross first?
mm-hmm.
And I think that, and this absolutely, I see this a lot in the entrepreneurial entrepreneurial world too, where all we see are the professional photos, the pictures of the person giving a speech in front of a huge crowd, um, the networking events, and results, results, results. I sold this many things to that many people. We don't talk about the days when we're sitting on the couch and can't get up and feel, like, why did I do this again? Should I get another 9 to 5? Like, was this a terrible idea? But that's a very real part of all of this.
Absolutely. And I love, you talking about the entrepreneurial experience too, and the amount of the potential for shame in those
Mhm,
situations, where we
mhm,
branch out to try and do something new, oftentimes by ourselves,
mm,
sometimes can feel insurmountable. And that's why community is so important in these and other aspirations, because not only do we not have to do it alone, but we're meant to be doing things together.
mhm. Yes, yes. And alone is where shame lives.
Yes. Hmm.
As soon as we shine a light on shame, shame is one of the most cowardly feelings that we have. And really shining a light on shame is a wonderful way to just let it go, be cowardly in the corner. Speaking for myself, it never fully goes away. Someday, we're working on that. And when I think about our next journal prompt, I wonder if we should talk about my least favorite subject, which is shame.
Mm. Right. And honestly, I was thinking about that when you were talking about, professional singer warm-ups, and, you were talking about the use of expletives. I think about I came across research saying that people who swear, not only does it help as a regulator, but it actually helps to lessen the sensation of pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, as long as you're not using it in absolute excess,
Mm-hmm.
they found that swearing, when you stub your toe or when you're experiencing physical pain, it actually lessens it. So I wonder if in a way that is also applied to the almost painful feeling of shame, and the different ways that we deal with it. So how do we respond to shame in those moments, I think, is a very powerful question.
Mm. So, how do we respond when we feel shame? Because sometimes we don't recognize it. Like here, but put
Mhm.
my therapist hat back on. It is an insidious feeling. It can take over your life and you never even know it's there. It
Mhm.
can just feel like a weird stomach ache, or I just don't have a lot of energy right now, or I'm just not talking as much as I used to, or I find I'm not speaking up in meetings anymore. Like all of that can be shame.
Mhm.
For everyone's different and no idea it's happening. So I think sometimes, again, shining a light on the shame. So, what's going on when we're feeling shame? What do you think about that, Caitlin? I don't love it because I don't like thinking about shame, but I feel like it's necessary.
I agree. I agree. Shame is not a popular topic, definitely for that reason. But one thing I will say too is, when we put these things in context, I think really helps. And this past weekend, I went to an in-laws relative's funeral,
Mm,
and long story short, they had a lot of struggles throughout their life,
yeah.
but nobody talked about that at this
Mm,
funeral or remembrance. They were remembered for all of the all of the wonderful things that they contributed to the family, and friends and artists that they worked with as well. And instead of being remembered for any disappointments, they were remembered as the reminder that people who love you for who you are
mm,
will love you regardless of those things.
mm,
And I was so incredibly touched by the conversations that resulted because several people talked about some of the last conversations they had with their loved one where they apologized for so many things and appreciated everybody's support throughout their life. And I just kept thinking we can have so much shame wrapped up in things that we wish we could have done better, or momentary regrets or lifetime regrets. But people that love and care about you know that you mean more to them than just that. So
Mm,
it was an incredible reminder of that. So to the point of this particular journal prompt, shame is not the end. Shame never looks as big to other people as it does to us.
mm,
And you're absolutely not alone in your experience, and there's always somebody that you can have a conversation with to help process that.
mm, mm, mm,
And I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not, even with that, I'm still not particularly looking forward to writing about this, but I know it's a good thing to do. And I'll probably be having some conversations with loved ones as well
mhm,
as a part of
mhm,
this.
mhm.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about this more with you.
Yeah, same. And Caitlin, that was powerful, and I think a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. And yeah, I anticipate some big feelings with this one. And maybe it is an opportunity to practice not just writing about it and thinking about it, but you're right, like bringing it to light with people that we know love us for who we are. Yeah, this one should be interesting and maybe even a little powerful.
I suspect as much as well.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. Such a pleasure again. And I look forward to speaking with you next time.
Me too. Until next time.